The Blood Pact, How a Demon Tree Devoured a Town Supernatural Horror Story. Have you ever received a letter that could rewrite your destiny, or bury it? Ethan Hale's life shattered the moment he opened an envelope stamped with a burning willow, a symbol that dragged him into Blackwood, Minnesota, a town where shadows breathe and roots hunger for blood. Inheriting a crumbling mansion from a stranger named Clara Westmore, Ethan has 90 days to survive its cursed halls, or become the next sacrifice in a centuries-old pact. But here's the twist: the tree remembers everything. If you're ready to unravel a legacy drenched in secrets, hit subscribe and step into the fog with me. Trust me, you'll want a flashlight and a friend for this journey. Ethan Hale's fingers trembled as he traced the embossed crest on the envelope, a willow tree engulfed in flames, its roots twisting into a serpent's tail. The postmark read Blackwood, Minnesota, a town he'd never heard of, yet the sender's name coiled around his mind like smoke: Clara Westmore. His cramped studio apartment in New York felt suddenly suffocating. Outside, the city roared, honking cabs, shrieking sirens, the relentless pulse of a world that never slept. But here in this envelope lay silence. A silence that smelled of pine resin and old secrets. The letter was brief, legal jargon stripped bare by a single demand: live in my house for 3 months, or forfeit your inheritance. Ethan scoffed. Inheritance? His family tree was a stunted thing: a father who vanished before he was born, a mother who spoke only in hushed tones about cursed blood. Clara Westmore wasn't just a stranger, she was a ghost. Yet the lawyer's words gnawed at him. Your aunt insisted you're the last living heir. The house, the library, they're yours. But the clock starts ticking the moment you arrive. 3 months. 90 days to unravel why a dead woman would summon him to a town carved from shadows. He packed a duffel bag, clothes, his dog-eared copy of the Federalist Papers, and the only photo he had of his mother, her face blurred by time. The bus to Blackwood crawled through landscapes that bled from steel-gray skyscrapers to endless stretches of Minnesota wilderness. When the driver dropped him off at a signpost reading population 873, Ethan's breath hitched. The town loomed like a Gothic etching: Victorian houses with sagging porches, their windows veiled by tattered lace. And at the center, a lake so still it mirrored the sky in perfect, eerie symmetry. Shadow Lake, the sign announced. The Westmore house stood at the lake's edge, its timber bones groaning in the wind. Ivy choked the walls, and the front door hung ajar as if Clara had left in a hurry. Inside, dust motes danced in slants of dying light. A grandfather clock ticked in the hallway, its hands frozen at 3:15. Ethan's boot crunched on something, a shattered picture frame. The photo beneath showed a woman in a 1940s dress standing beneath a weeping willow, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Clara. Her eyes, the same storm gray as his own, seemed to follow him. He found the library upstairs. Bookshelves clawed at the ceiling, crammed with volumes on alchemy, Appalachian folklore, and trial transcripts from the 1800s. A mahogany desk bore a leather-bound journal, its pages blank except for a single entry dated October 31st, 1987. They think I'm mad. But the willow remembers. It always does. A cold draft snaked through the room. Outside, the willow tree shuddered, its branches scraping the window like skeletal fingers. 2. The fog clung to Blackwood like a funeral shroud, muffling the creak of Ethan's boots as he stepped onto Main Street. The town seemed carved from a different century. Gas lamps flickered weakly against the gloom, their light swallowed by shop windows displaying rusted typewriters and moth-eaten taxidermy. A sign above a crumbling brick building read Raven's Nest Bakery, its letters bleached by time. The scent of burnt sugar seeped through the cracked door, laced with something darker, metallic. Blood? Ethan shook off the thought. Jet lag, he told himself. Or Clara's madness rubbing off. The bakery bell jingled. Behind the counter stood a woman in a lace collar dress, her silver hair coiled into a knot so tight it stretched her skin. Her eyes pale blue, glassy as a doll's, locked onto him. You're Clara's boy, she said, not a question. Ethan Hale. He forced a smile. You knew my aunt? The woman wiped her hands on an apron stained with dried berry juice. Eloise Mercer. And no one knew Clara. They feared her. She slid a porcelain plate across the counter. A single raven-shaped cookie lay atop it, its wings glazed crimson. Eat. You'll need strength for what's coming. He hesitated. The cookie smelled like cloves and myrrh. What's coming? Eloise's laugh was a dry rasp. The willow's hungry. Always has been. Before he could ask, the door slammed open. A gust of wind scattered napkins, and a girl strode in, early 20s, a leather satchel slung over her trench coat, chestnut hair streaked with violet. She froze when she saw Ethan. Lila Harper. Eloise's voice turned icy. Still snooping through other people's tragedies? Lila ignored her, thrusting a flyer at Ethan. Grand reopening of Westmore Library, now a museum. The date was 6 months old, the word cancelled stamped in angry red ink. You're the nephew, right? Don't sleep in Clara's house. The foundation's unstable. Her gaze darted to the cookie. And don't eat anything offered here after sundown. Ethan followed her outside. What's wrong with the house? Lila lit a cigarette, the flame trembling in her cupped hand. Clara died in the library. They say her shadow still paces the shelves, pulling books about pagan rituals and arsenic. She exhaled smoke, her voice dropping. The night she died, the willow tree bloomed. In December. Petals black as a hearse. A cold droplet hit Ethan's neck. Rain. Above them, the willow's branches writhed against a thunderhead. Lila gripped his arm. You shouldn't have come. This town doesn't let go of Wetsy. A scream tore through the street. They sprinted toward the lake. A crowd had gathered at the shore, their whispers merging with the lapping waves. Ethan shoved through, then wished he hadn't. There, tangled in the willow's roots, was a deer. Or what remained of one. Its rib cage yawned open, organs missing, antlers snapped off. The bark around the carcass gleamed wetly as if the tree had sweated. Third one this month, a man muttered. Same as 87. Lila bent down, gloved fingers brushing a splintered antler. Carved into the bone was a symbol, a willow tree inside a crescent moon, the same emblem from Clara's envelope. They're marking the sacrifices, she whispered. Thunder cracked. The crowd scattered, leaving Ethan alone with the corpse and the whispering leaves. When he turned to ask Lila what the symbol meant, she was gone. In her place lay a note, weighted by a shard of antler. Meet me at the library. Midnight. Come alone, or the next sacrifice won't be animal. The Westmore Library's doors groaned like a tomb ceiling shut. Ethan's flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating dust-swirled air and shelves bowed under the weight of leather-bound ledgers. Lila stood by a fireplace, her violet-streaked hair glowing faintly in the moonlight bleeding through stained glass. You're late, she said, tossing him a pair of gloves. And alive. Surprising. Your note wasn't exactly subtle. He held up the antler shard. The crescent and willow symbol pulsed faintly as if carved with luminescent ink. Lila yanked a moth-eaten tapestry off the wall, revealing a rusted metal plate. Engraved on it were Latin phrases interspersed with alchemical symbols. Sanguis pro sanguine, she translated. Blood for blood. The Blackwood Pact, signed in 1862 by your ancestors and the Nightshade Society. The what? Local boogeymen. Rich folks who thought sacrificing kids to a tree would keep their gold mines thriving. She pressed her palm against the plate. A click echoed, and a section of the floor slid open, exhaling a breath of decay. Ethan's throat tightened. You've done this before. Clara showed me. 2 weeks before she died. Lila descended the stairs, her voice fading into the dark. She believed the original pact was a lie. The Nightshade didn't want gold, they wanted control. The willow's roots run under the whole town. Poison the tree, poison the people. The tunnel narrowed, walls oozing black sap. Ethan's flashlight caught something embedded in the muck, a child's shoe, its leather petrified. Don't touch anything, Lila warned. The walls are eye. Ethan stumbled, his hand brushing a root. Images exploded behind his eyes, a girl in a white dress, her wrists slit, blood trickling into the soil. Clara's voice screaming. He wrenched free, gasping. Did you see that? See what? Lila's frown deepened. The roots are conduits. They store memories or curses. Depends on who you ask. The tunnel spilled into a circular chamber. At its center stood a stone coffin, lid cracked. Inside lay a skeleton clutching a copper disc etched with a willow tree. Its roots became veins, branching into names. Westmore, Blackwood, Mercer. Sacrifice ledger, Lila whispered. Every generation, one member from each family. She pointed to fresh scratches near the bottom. Clara Westmore, 1987. Ethan's fingers hovered over his own surname. Why isn't mine here? Because you're the last. No one left, Tui. A rumble shook the chamber. Dirt rained down as roots burst through the ceiling, thrashing like serpents. Lila shoved Ethan aside as one speared the coffin, reducing it to rubble. Run, she yelled. They scrambled back, roots snapping at their heels. Ethan's flashlight died, plunging them into blackness. He gripped Lila's arm, their breath sinking to the rhythm of pursuit. Above ground, they barricaded the library doors. Outside, the willow tree lashed the windows, its branches drumming a frenzied tattoo. Lila pressed the copper disc into Ethan's hand. This is a voting token. The nightshade used them to choose sacrifices. Clara had one hidden in her journal. The disc burned cold. On its reverse side, a new name glimmered in blood-red patina. Ethan Hale. They've already marked you, Lila said. The meeting where they vote is tomorrow. At the Red Pine Mine. Ethan stared at his name. What happens there? A branch shattered the window. Glass shards rained down as Lila pulled him into the shadows. Either we expose them, she said, or you become the next corpse feeding the willow. The Red Pine Mine's entrance yawned like a rotten tooth, its timber support splintered by decades of neglect. Ethan gripped the copper disc, its edges biting into his palm. Lila's flashlight swept over graffiti-scarred walls, turned back. The nightshade sees all. They'll be watching, she muttered, adjusting her gas mask. The mine's laced with arsenic dust. Clara's journal mentioned it, part of the cleansing ritual before sacrifices. Ethan's lungs burned with every step. The air reeked of sulfur and something sweetly organic, like decaying blossoms. The willow's roots, he realized. They slithered across the tunnel floor, pulsing faintly as if nourished by the mine's toxins. Ahead, voices echoed. They crouched behind a rusted ore cart. In a cavern lit by gas lamps, 7 figures cloaked in black stood around a stone altar. Arthur Blackwood dominated the center, his mask carved into a raven's beak. The Hale boy lives, he intoned. A breach of the pact. Murmurs rippled through the group. A woman's voice hissed, his bloodline ended with Clara. The roots reject him. Arthur lifted a vial of murky liquid, Ethan's stolen saliva from the bakery cookie. The test proves it. Westmore blood still flows in him. The tree hungers. Lila stiffened. They've been tracking you since you arrived, she whispered. That's why Eloise gave you the... A root lashed out, snaring her ankle. She slammed into the cart, the crash reverberating through the mine. Intruders! Arthur roared. Ethan dragged Lila into a side tunnel, roots splintering the walls behind them. They stumbled into an abandoned shaft, its ceiling strung with skeletal remains. Miners' hats littered the ground, their headlamps still glowing. They're not human, Lila gasped, pointing. The skeleton's skulls bore the same crescent and willow symbol, etched into bone. Shouts echoed closer. Ethan spotted a metal door labeled Vault 7, high-grade ore. Inside, they'd barricaded themselves amid stacks of ledgers and a mahogany box inlaid with the nightshade crest. Lila pried it open. Photographs spilled out. Clara at a town fair, laughing with a young Eloise Mercer. Newspaper clippings about a fire that wiped out the Westmore branch in 1987, and a marriage certificate. Clara Westmore and Jacob Hale, 1985. Ethan's breath caught. Hale. His father's name. Clara was your grandmother, Lila said softly. She faked her branch's death to protect your father. But the nightshade found out. That's why she had to die. Footsteps thudded outside. Arthur's voice slithered through the door. You carry her defiance, Ethan. But the tree always wins. Open the door and I'll spare the girl. Lila pressed a rusted pickaxe into his hand. The roots here are weak. Strike the wall, there's an old air shaft. What about you? She smiled, a flash of sorrow in her eyes. I owe Clara this much. Before he could protest, she flung the door open, charging at the cultists with a roar. Ethan swung the pickaxe. Rock crumbled, revealing a narrow chute. He climbed as screams echoed below, human and something else, a wet, guttural shrieking that could only be the roots. Sunlight blinded him as he emerged. Below, the mine entrance trembled. Lila burst out, her coat torn and bloody. Behind her, the tunnel collapsed, burying Arthur's snarl. The vote is done, Ethan. The tree will claim you at midnight. In her hand, she clutched a ledger page. Listed under pending sacrifices. Ethan Hale, midnight, Shadow Lake. Lila Harper, to be determined. The clock tower struck 11. 23 tolls left. Ethan and Lila crouched in the shadow of Blackwood Chapel, its spire spearing a moonlit sky. The stained glass windows glowed faintly, depicting saints with willow branches instead of halos. The cult's first headquarters, Lila said, picking the rusted padlock. Clara found records here, names of every sacrifice since 1862. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of air that smelled of incense and iron. Pews lay overturned, hymnals scattered like carcasses. Above the altar, a massive window depicted a willow tree devouring a crowd of miners, its roots coiled around their throats. Lila traced the name etched in the glass corner. G. Blackwood, 1890. Arthur's great-grandfather. The artist who designed this, and the first to feed the tree. Ethan's flashlight caught something beneath the altar, A child's doll, its porcelain face cracked. A scrap of fabric around its neck matched the dress in Clara's photo. Your grandmother left this, Lila whispered. She used toys to communicate. The cult monitored her letters, but they ignored this. She squeezed the doll's torso. A hidden compartment popped open, revealing a microfilm titled Nightshade Trial Transcripts, 1947. Ethan unrolled it. The words "case dismissed," lack of evidence stamped over a child's autopsy photo. They killed kids and got away with it? Not kids. Heirs. Lila pointed to the willow in the stained glass. Every sacrifice weakens the family, concentrates power into the tree. Your bloodline was supposed to die with Clara, but a guttural growl cut her off. Roots erupted through the floorboards, shattering the doll. Ethan grabbed Lila, dragging her into a confessional booth. The roots slammed against the door, splinters raining down. The ledger page, Lila gasped. It's a contract. The cult needs your signature to finalize the sacrifice. That's why they haven't killed you yet. Ethan remembered the copper disc, the voting token. He pulled it out. His name now glowed alongside a dotted line. Don't sign it, Lila warned. Even in blood, it'll bind you. Outside, the clock struck 11:30. Shadows pooled beneath the chapel doors, thickening into human shapes. The cult had found them. Lila pressed a vial of black liquid into his hand. Willow sap mixed with Clara's ashes. She called it the Unmaker. Poured on the roots to weaken them. How do you know all this? Ethan's voice sharpened. You're not just some librarian. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she unbuttoned her collar, revealing a crescent and willow brand on her clavicle. I was their chosen sacrifice at 16. Clara saved me. Now I'm immune. Mostly. The door exploded. Arthur strode in, maskless, his face a patchwork of scarred roots. Touching, he sneered. But the tree prefers its meat unspoiled by lies. He snapped his fingers. Cultists seized Lila, dragging her toward the altar. Sign the disc, Arthur said, thrusting a bone stylus at Ethan. Or watch her heart become fertilizer. The stained glass trembled as roots encased Lila, thorns piercing her skin. Her scream tore through Ethan. He dipped the stylus, his own blood welling from a cut, and hovered over the disc. Then he hurled the vial of Unmaker at the window. The glass shattered. Moonlight flooded in, igniting the sap-coated roots. They recoiled, howling as flames raced toward the altar. Arthur lunged, but Ethan stabbed the stylus into his branded hand. Run! Lila yelled, breaking free. They fled into the cemetery behind the chapel. Behind them, the tree's roar shook the earth, graves splitting open to disgorge skeletal roots. Lila gripped Ethan's arm, her breath ragged. The lake. We end this where it began. Midnight loomed. Somewhere in the woods a bell tolled the cult's summons. Shadow Lake's surface mirrored the storm. A cauldron of black water and lightning. At its center loomed the willow, roots exposed like gnarled veins. Its trunk split open to reveal a hollow pulsating with sickly green light. Lila waded into the shallows, her movements sluggish. The crescent brand on her collarbone had spread. Thorny tendrils now creeping up her neck. The Unmaker bought us time, she said, voice fraying. But the roots, they're inside me. Ethan gripped the copper disc, its surface scorched from the chapel fire. Clara's final message echoed in his mind. Break the cycle where it began. He stared at the willow's hollow. Where it began. Arthur emerged from the tree, his body fused with bark, one eye replaced by a glowing root node. You can't kill what's already dead, boy. His laugh crackled like breaking branches. The first Westmore made this pact. His blood is your blood. What first Westmore? Ethan demanded. The lake rippled. Images flickered across the water. A man in 1862 burying a corpse beneath the willow. A woman with Lila's face. Blood for eternity, he chanted as roots coiled around her heart. My ancestor, Lila whispered. The first sacrifice. The tree, it's her. Arthur lunged. Ethan dodged, slashing with the disc. It sliced through bark, releasing a spray of sap that burned like acid. Lila screamed. The thorns in her skin writhed, dragging her toward the tree. The disc, she gasped. Use it on the hollow. Ethan plunged into the trunk. The air thickened with the stench of decay and roses. Inside, roots cradled a mummified body. Lila's ancestor, her mouth sewn shut with gold thread. Clutched in her skeletal hand was a journal labeled Elias Westmore 1862. Ethan flipped it open. The final entry. I regret nothing. My Eleanor's soul sustains the tree. And the tree sustains Blackwood. Our gold will outlive the stars. A root speared Ethan's shoulder, pinning him to the trunk. Arthur's voice boomed through the chamber. You're too late. The vote is done. Outside, Lila's screams crescendoed. Ethan grabbed the gold thread from the corpse's lips. Blood for blood, Clara's voice whispered. But love cuts deeper. He stabbed the thread into the root, impaling him. The tree shuddered, its light dimming. No, Arthur roared. Ethan tore the journal page, igniting it with his lighter. Flames raced up the roots, devouring the hollow. He crawled out as the willow erupted into a pyre. Lila lay at the water's edge, the thorns retreating from her skin. Arthur's bark shell crumbled, revealing a hollowed-out man. You've doomed us all, he rasped before dissolving into ash. The lake stilled. Dawn bled across the sky, illuminating a sapling sprouting from the charred remains. A willow no larger than a rosebush, its leaves translucent. Lila touched a leaf. It's clean. No poison. Ethan knelt beside her. The crescent brand on her neck had vanished. You knew, he said quietly, that your ancestor was the first sacrifice. That's why Clara chose you. She met his gaze. And why she chose you. Westmore blood to break the pact, Hale blood too. She froze. Around the sapling, footprints materialized in the ash, small, barefoot, leading into the woods. The sapling grew a foot each night. By the third dawn, its branches scraped the roof of the Westmore house, leaves shimmering with dew that smelled of copper. Lila paced the library, her reflection warped in the antique mirror Clara had salvaged from the 1890s mine collapse. It's draining the town, she said. Crops withered overnight. Cattle dropped dead, their eyes milky. Even the rain turned viscous, staining the soil rust red. Ethan studied the Hale family ledger. His father's birth certificate listed no father, only Clara's name and a footnote. Child of reconciliation. What if the Hales weren't just victims? What if they were the original cult's rivals? The mirror fogged. A handprint materialized on the glass, followed by Clara's voice, thin as spider silk. Look deeper. The reflection shifted. No longer the library, but a moonlit clearing where two men shook hands, one bearing the Westmore crest, the other the Hale falcon. A sapling sprouted between them, watered by blood from a slit palm. A truce, Lila breathed. The first pact wasn't just Westmore and Nightshade. The Hales were part of it. The vision shattered. Ethan's hand bled where the ledger's edge had cut him. A droplet hit the sapling's root, snaking through the floorboards. The tree quivered, its bark splitting to form a mouth. Ethan, it groaned in Clara's voice. You must nourish. Lila slammed a hatchet into the root. Black sap sprayed, scarring the wallpaper. It's mimicking her to manipulate you. We need to. A knock interrupted her. On the porch stood Deputy Collins, his uniform crisp, smile too wide. Heard you're restoring the Westmore Museum. The Historical Society wants to donate artifacts. He thrust a crate at Ethan. Inside lay a child's diary from 1911 and a locket containing Clara's photo. Found these in the old schoolhouse basement, Collins said. His shadow, Ethan noticed, didn't match his movements. It arched like a crow's wings. Lila waited until his patrol car vanished down the road. He's Nightshade. They're not gone, just rebranded. The diary's brittle pages detailed a harvest ceremony. The sapling must consume the reconciler's blood to ascend. Ethan's blood. The locket's clasp pricked his thumb, drinking a drop. Midnight. The sapling's branches tapped Morse code against the window. Come out. Ethan gripped the hatchet. We end this tonight. Lila hesitated. There's something I didn't tell you. When the sapling touched me, I saw possibilities. If we destroy it, the town dies. If we let it grow. What? She opened her palm. A newborn willow leaf lay there, its veins glowing gold. It could heal everything the old tree poisoned, but it'll need a guardian. Someone tied to both bloodlines. The sapling's roots burst through the door. The sapling's roots didn't drag Ethan, they invited. They coiled around his wrists like velvet ropes, pulling him toward the tree now towering over Westmore House. Its bark pulsed with veins of gold, leaves rustling in a language that carved itself into his bones. You are the bridge. Lila fought the roots with a fire poker, her arms streaked with blackened sap. Don't listen. It's using your blood to. A scream cut her off. Downstairs, Mrs. Donovan from the post office stood in the foyer, her face a mirror of Ethan's. No, not a mirror. A copy. Her skin rippled, features melting into his exact likeness. What's happening? The Ethan doppelganger cried. More townsfolk flooded the street, their bodies flickering between their true forms and Ethan's. A child wailed as her hands morphed into his, clutching a half-formed Hale family crest. Deputy Collins emerged, untouched by the chaos, his shadow still winged. The saplings unifying the bloodlines. Soon everyone will be you, and no one. He tossed a sheriff's badge into the crowd. It melted midair, reforming as a willow leaf. The Nightshade's new era requires uniformity. Ethan's doppelgangers reached for him, their chants merging. Join us. Become the root. Lila dragged him into the secret tunnel beneath the house. Her breath came in rasps, the crescent brand reappearing as a festering wound. The tree isn't evil, it's trapped. All the sacrifices, their souls are stuck in its roots. You're the first heir with both Westmore and Hale blood. You can free them. By dying. Ethan snapped. By ascending. She pulled out Clara's locket. Inside, a new photo shimmered. Clara holding a baby, Ethan's father, beside a man with the Hale Falcon tattoo. The reconciler must become the vessel, Clara's voice whispered from the locket. The tunnel trembled. Roots tore through the walls, carrying the stench of decayed roses. Ethan's doppelgangers crawled in, their bones cracking as they contorted into human willow hybrids. Deputy Collins' voice boomed through the earth. The ceremony begins at dawn. The sapling demands its king. Lila pressed a vial of Clara's ashes into Ethan's hand. This can sever the bloodline, but it'll erase every Westmore and Hale from history, including you. Ethan stared at the ashes. What if I say no? Then the sapling consumes the town, and the cycle continues. She lifted her shirt. Roots now snaked around her ribs, burrowing toward her heart. I'm already part of it. But you can still choose oblivion. The hybrids lunged. Ethan smashed the vial. Ash swirled, forming Clara's spectral figure. She pointed to the sapling's core, where a single golden root throbbed. The original Pact, she whispered. Cut it and we all fall. Ethan gripped the fire poker. What happens to you? To the souls? Clara's ghost smiled. We finally rest. As the hybrids closed in, Ethan made his choice. The golden root pulsed like a heart. Ethan plunged the fire poker into it, not with a scream but a whisper. Enough. The world split. One moment he stood in the tunnel. The next he floated in a garden where willows grew upside down, roots cradling skeletal chandeliers. Souls flickered inside glass leaves. Eloise Mercer as a girl, Clara clutching her journal, miners with hollow eyes. At the garden's center stood Eleanor, Lila's ancestor, her lips still stitched with gold. You've come to kill us again. Eleanor's voice echoed through the void. To free you, Ethan said. Laughter rippled. The souls swarmed him, their whispers merging. Freedom requires a trade. A life for a life. Behind him, Lila materialized, roots now blooming from her eye sockets. They want me, she said. I'm the last descendant of the first sacrifice. My death breaks the chain. Ethan gripped her hand. Her skin flaked like bark. There's another way. There isn't. Clara's ghost appeared, translucent but resolute. The tree bound us through bloodlines. Sever both and the garden dies. She pointed to Eleanor, whose stitches dissolved to reveal a final plea. Save her. Before Ethan could react, Deputy Collins stormed into the garden, his body morphing, Hale Falcon tattoo blazing on his neck. Did you think the Nightshade relied on Westmore's alone? He plunged a dagger into the golden root, siphoning its light. My ancestors created the Pact. Tonight I reclaim it. The garden shuddered. Willows crumbled, souls shrieking as Collins absorbed their energy. Lila collapsed, roots devouring her. Ethan grabbed the dagger. Collins' blood dripped onto Eleanor's skeleton, her bones knitting into flesh. You forgot, Ethan hissed. Hale blood goes both ways. He slashed his palm, smearing blood on the dagger. The garden erupted. 3 truths unfolded at once. Collins was Ethan's uncle, disowned for refusing Clara's plea to end the pact. Lila's roots were never a curse. They were a bridge to commune with the trapped. The sapling's true purpose, to merge all souls into a new world, erasing Blackwood's sins. Colin screamed as the souls he'd consumed rebelled, tearing him apart from within. Eleanor gripped Lila, unstitching her own mouth to whisper, "The garden must burn. Take them home." Ethan threw the dagger to Clara. She drove it into the garden's core. The explosion was silent. Ethan awoke at dawn, Lila's head on his chest, her scars healed. The sapling lay uprooted, dead. Around it, wildflowers bloomed in the shape of names. Clara, Eleanor, the miners, even Colin's. In the ashes, a single seed glowed. The townsfolk called it the quiet dawn. No more whispers in the fog. No more roots clawing at windows. Blackwood breathed again, its scars hidden beneath wildflowers that bloomed where blood once soaked the soil. Ethan stood at the edge of Shadow Lake, the glowing seed resting in his palm. Lila knelt beside him, tracing the names carved into the new memorial stone. Clara, Eleanor. Even the miners lost to the mine's greed. "It's over," she said, but her eyes lingered on the seed. "Is it?" Ethan thought. The seed pulsed, warm and insistent, as if the earth itself craved its return. They buried it at midnight, under the memorial stone. No words, no rituals, just silence. The soil swallowed it whole. By morning, the Westmore house reopened as a museum. Townsfolk shuffled through rooms filled with Clara's journals, the miners' artifacts, and Colin's sheriff badge, now labeled the guardian who fell. Ethan watched them, wondering how many truly remembered. Lila touched his arm. "You kept your promise." He'd almost forgotten Clara's plea to end the cycle. But as the crowd dispersed, a girl lingered by the memorial. Her shadow stretched too long, too sharp, before melting into the noon sun. 1 year later, the sapling was no taller than a tulip, its leaves translucent. Ethan watered it daily, though it never grew. Lila claimed it absorbed memories instead. The museum's grief, the town's guilt, their quiet hopes. "It's changing," she said one autumn evening. A single leaf had turned gold, its veins mapping the lake's silhouette. That night, Ethan dreamed of Clara. She stood in the garden of bones, now lush with poppies. "Some roots can't be cut," she said, handing him a raven-shaped cookie. When he woke, Eloise Mercer's bakery was shuttered. A for sale sign plastered with wilted flyers. 5 years later, the sapling vanished. In its place stood a swing set, donated by a historian named Lila Harper. Children laughed where the memorial once loomed, their shoes kicking up dust that sparkled like gold. Ethan rarely dreamed now, but sometimes when the lake stilled he glimpsed faces in the water. Clara sipping tea, Eleanor braiding Lila's hair, Collins tending roses. They never spoke. They never needed to. On the 10th anniversary, a letter arrived. No postmark, no sender. Inside was a pressed willow leaf and a photo of the sapling, now towering over a forest somewhere unnamed. On the back, a single phrase, "The garden grows anew. Come home." Ethan tucked it into Clara's journal, the museum's newest exhibit. Outside, Lila waved from the lake's edge, her laughter mingling with the wind. The sapling was gone, but the roots remained, quiet, patient, alive. As the clock strikes midnight and the willow's whispers grow louder, ask yourself, would you sign the pact to save your soul? Or let the roots claim you? Ethan's choice will rewrite Blackwood's fate, but one wrong move, and the town's hunger becomes your nightmare. Stay until the end if you dare. Because in this story, the real horror isn't what's buried underground, it's what's growing back.